She slid the folder across the conference table like it was a quarterly report. Didn't say a word. Just looked at me the way you'd look at a contractor whose work was finished. Clinical. Practiced. Like she'd rehearsed it. I picked it up. Opened it. Divorce petition. My name on the top line. Hers on the bottom. Notarized 3 days before. 12 people were in that room. Partners, associates, 2 clients. We'd spent 6 months courting. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. My wife, my soon-to-be ex-wife, had just handed me divorce papers in the middle of a firm-wide strategy meeting she had called. I closed the folder, set it down, straightened it so the edges lined up with the edge of the table. Then I smiled. Not because I was fine. I wasn't fine. But because I had known this was coming for longer than she realized. And because everything she thought she'd just taken from me, I'd already moved. I need to back up 34 years. When I was 28 years old, I was working as a junior associate at a regional law firm in Columbus, Ohio. Small place. 8 attorneys, 1 paralegal named Helen who ran everything and knew it. I was handling contract reviews and the occasional real estate closing. Nothing glamorous. But I was good at the work, and I was patient. I met my wife at a bar, and I was patient. I met my wife at a bar association mixer in the spring of 1991. She was 24, just finished her first year at Ohio State Law. Sharp as anyone I'd ever met. She could pull apart an argument the way a mechanic pulls apart an engine. Methodically, without wasted motion. I was impressed before I was in love, which is probably the right order. We married 2 years later. She finished her degree. I made associate. We rented a 2-bedroom in Clintonville and ate a lot of pasta because we were paying off 2 law school loans and trying to save enough for a down payment on something with a yard. I don't say any of this to complain. Those were good years. Lean, but good. What happened over the next 3 decades is the kind of story people tell at retirement dinners and make sound effortless. It wasn't effortless. I'd built a boutique firm from the ground up. Starting with 2 clients I brought over from my original employer, a handshake agreement with a commercial real estate developer named Phil, who became my anchor client for 15 years. And an office lease I could barely afford in a building that smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and old coffee. My wife joined me in year 3. By then we had our son, and she'd been working at the county prosecutor's office and was ready for something different. I offered her partnership, not because she was my wife. Because she was the best attorney I knew, and I needed someone I could trust with the client relationships. I was too busy to manage myself. That was the arrangement. I built. She managed. I originated the business. She kept it running. For a long time, it worked beautifully. I want to be careful here, because I'm not a bitter man. I have worked hard not to become one, but I also want to be honest, because I think there are people who will read something like this and recognize it. This slow, almost invisible shift in a partnership where one person starts to believe that managing the thing is the same as creating it. The first time I noticed something was different, we were at a dinner with a client, a hospital network CFO we've been advising on a facilities acquisition. During the meal, he turned to my wife and said, "You must be the brains behind the operation." She laughed and didn't correct him. Small thing. I told myself it was nothing. The second time was at our firm's 10-year anniversary party. She gave a toast. It was eloquent and warm and covered the history of the firm in detail. My name came up twice, both times in the context of things that had gone wrong early and been corrected. I sat there and clapped with everyone else. The third time was when she started having meetings with the other partners. We had 4 by then without telling me. Not hiding them exactly, just scheduling them during times she knew I'd be in depositions or out of the office. When I asked about one of them, she said it was administrative. I let it go. I should not have let it go. What I learned later, much later, was that she had been building a case for over a year. Not a legal case, a political one. Talking to the other partners individually, framing a narrative about the firm's future direction, about modernizing, about bringing in younger talent, about how the founding generation sometimes holds an institution back without meaning to. She wasn't wrong about all of it. That's the part that made it harder. I was 61. I had begun to pull back from the more grueling cases, the ones that required 70-hour weeks and cross-country depositions. I'd earned that. 30 years of building something earns you the right to choose your workload. I wasn't coasting. I was still the firm's primary rainmaker. My relationships, my reputation, my phone calls were still the reason the biggest clients stayed. But I was not in the room as much. And she had used that absence to tell story. In March of last year, the partners voted. My wife was named managing partner, which in our firm's structure, a structure I had written, by the way, carried most of the operational authority. I wasn't at the vote. I was in Cleveland for a mediation that had been scheduled for 3 months. She called me that evening. Told me in a voice that was carefully warm. Said the partners felt it was time for fresh leadership. Said she hoped I understood. Said she thought this was actually good for us. Less pressure on me, more support for the firm. I told her I was happy for her. I was not happy. But I was not surprised, because 2 months earlier I had gotten a call from Phil, my original anchor client, the developer I'd worked with for 15 years, who said he'd been approached by someone from my firm about transitioning his account to a new relationship manager. He was confused. He thought he should let me know. He let me know. And after that call, I made some decisions. I need to explain something about how law firms work, because this matters. The clients belong to the client, not the firm, not the partner who manages them. If a client wants to follow an attorney who leaves, they can. Relationships, real ones, built over decades, are not assets on a balance sheet. They're trust, and trust follows the person who earned it. I had spent 30 years earning it. Over the next 6 weeks, after Phil's call, I did something I should probably have done differently. I didn't confront her. I didn't call a partners meeting. I didn't threaten or negotiate. Instead, I called every significant client relationship I had personally originated and maintained. I had honest conversations. I explained that I was exploring some changes to my practice structure. I asked if they'd be open to working with me directly through a separate entity, if that became necessary. 14 out of 17 said yes without hesitation. I also quietly consulted with an attorney I trusted, not at my firm, obviously, about the structure of my equity stake, my origination agreements, and what the partnership agreement actually said about transition rights. What I found was this. The partnership agreement, which I had drafted in 2003 and which had been amended twice since, contained a clause, my language, that gave any founding partner the right to separate their originated client base into a personal professional corporation upon retirement or voluntary withdrawal, with a 12-month transition period and no penalty. I had put that clause in to protect myself from exactly this kind of situation, not because I anticipated this exact betrayal, but because I'm an attorney and I have spent my career telling clients that you document everything and you protect yourself in writing, even from the people you love. You especially protect yourself from the people you love. I had just never applied that advice to my own marriage. The morning of the strategy meeting, the one where she handed me the divorce papers, I had already filed the paperwork to establish my professional corporation. I had already sent formal notice to my 14 clients that I would be transitioning my practice. I had already spoken to Phil, who had agreed to follow me, and had recommended 2 of his associates do the same. I had also, the night before, moved the funds from our joint investment account, my half, precisely calculated, into an account in my name only. I didn't touch her half. Not a dollar. I'm not proud of the secrecy. But I'm not ashamed of the preparation. She didn't know any of this when she slid that folder across the table. After I set the folder down and straightened it, I looked at her. She was watching me with an expression that was trying to be neutral and wasn't quite making it. I could see something underneath it. Not triumph, exactly. Anticipation. She was waiting for the reaction. The hurt, the anger, the discomposure. 34 years of marriage, and she thought she could predict me. I said, "Is there anything else on the agenda?" One of the junior partners made a sound that might have been a laugh and then wasn't. My wife said, "I think we should table the rest of the meeting." I said, "That's fine." I gathered my notepad. I stood. "Congratulations again on the managing partner appointment, by the way. The firm is in good hands. I meant it as a kindness. I meant it as a kindness." I think she heard it as something else. I walked out of that room with my folder tucked under my arm and my jacket buttoned, and I drove to a diner 3 miles away and ordered coffee and eggs and sat there for 2 hours and let myself feel everything I hadn't let myself feel, everything I hadn't let myself feel in the conference room. It was bad. I won't pretend it wasn't. 34 years. A son we'd raised. A firm we'd built. A life that had been real, even if the ending wasn't. But I had done the work. And the work had been done. The call started that afternoon. First from her attorney, a woman I knew professionally, which made it awkward for everyone. She was professional. Outlined the petition. Asked if I had representation. I gave her the name of my attorney who had been expecting her call. Then from two of the partners, separately, both clearly checking to see how I was doing and also clearly wondering what this meant for the firm. I told both of them the same thing. I wished everyone well, and they would be receiving formal notice of my client transition within the week, per the terms of the partnership agreement. There was a silence on the second call that lasted long enough for me to count to 6. The clause, the partner said finally. He'd been with us for 9 years. Smart man. The clause, I confirmed. He said, I didn't realize. Most people don't read the founding documents all the way through, I said. I did. I wrote them. My son called that evening. He lives in Portland now. Works in tech, which is about as far from law as you can get, and I think that was deliberate. He'd heard from his mother. He asked me if I was okay. I told him the truth. I said I was not okay in the way that anyone is not okay when a 34-year marriage ends in a conference room, but that I was okay in the sense that I had been honest with myself for long enough that the ground under my feet still felt solid. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Dad, did you see this coming? I said yes. He said, how long? I said, long enough. Another silence. Then, did she know you knew? I said, no. He sighed the way he used to sigh when he was 14 and we'd reached the end of an argument, and he had run out of counterpoints. Classic, he said. And then softer, I'm sorry, Dad. That one hit harder than the folder did. The legal process took 8 months. Clean, as these things go. No minor children, assets clearly documented. The professional corporation structure I'd established actually simplified things considerably because it created a clean line between marital assets and professional transition assets. Her attorney pushed back on the client revenues. My attorney cited the clause. Mediation lasted 4 hours. We settled. I won't discuss the specific terms because they're sealed and also because that's not the point. The point is that I left the mediation with my practice intact, my primary client relationships intact, and enough financial footing to start the next chapter from a position of stability rather than desperation. She left with the firm, which, I want to be clear, was also a substantial asset. I'm not suggesting she walked away with nothing. She didn't. She got what she'd built, and I got what I built. And the 34 years in between are something neither of us can divide or fully account for. I've been in my new practice for 7 months now. It's smaller than what I had. 3 attorneys, including myself, 2 paralegals, an office in Dublin, Ohio, with big windows and a coffee maker that I bought myself, and don't share with anyone if I don't want to. Phil referred 2 more clients last fall. A hospital network, different one than the CFO from that dinner years ago, came on in January through a referral from someone I'd helped in a pro bono matter 15 years ago. Word travels. I'm 62 years old. I work 4 days a week by choice. I take long lunches. I call my son on Sundays and we talk about football and his work and occasionally, briefly, about everything else. I don't date. Not yet. Maybe not for a while. 34 years is a long time to be one half of something, and I have learned, slowly, imperfectly, that it is better to sit with that than to rush past it. People have asked me, my son, a few close friends, my paralegal who has known me for 12 years and has earned the right to ask anything, what I would have done differently. It's a reasonable question. The answer I've arrived at, after 7 months of thinking about it, is this. I would have had the honest conversation earlier. Not about the divorce. I don't know that anything would have changed that outcome, but about the partnership, about what I was seeing, about the clients being approached, the meetings I wasn't invited to, the way she'd started talking about the firm as though I were a footnote. I was afraid that naming it would break something. What I didn't understand now, is that the thing was already broken. It had been breaking for years. And by the time I noticed, I had a choice between having a hard conversation or doing the quiet work of protecting myself. I chose the quiet work. It served me practically. But I think the honest conversation would have served me better in ways that can't be measured in billable hours or client retention rates. My wife, my ex-wife, and I have spoken twice since the settlement. Once about a tax matter that required both our signatures, once when our son called us both at the same time on his birthday, which I think was an accident, or maybe not entirely. Both conversations were civil, neither was warm. There is a version of the story where the ending is different, where two lawyers who spent 30 years building something together figure out how to rebuild whatever came after, in some different form. I don't think that's this version, but I have learned, at 62, not to declare things impossible. What I know is simpler than any of it. I know that the day she slid that folder across the table, she thought she was ending something. She thought she was closing a chapter on terms she'd written. What she didn't know, what I had made sure she couldn't know, was that I had already started writing the next one. I straightened that folder. I smiled. I stood up and buttoned my jacket, and I walked out of that room into something that was mine. People ask me sometimes what the hardest part was. They expect me to say the conference room, the folder sliding across the table, 12 people watching and nobody moving. It wasn't that. The hardest part was the years before it. The years where I saw things clearly and chose not to name them, where I told myself that a marriage could hold two people who had started pulling in different directions as long as neither one said it out loud. I was wrong about that. Silence doesn't preserve things. It just delays the accounting. What I've come to understand, and I'm 62 years old, so I've had some time to sit with this, is that the outcomes in our lives are rarely random. They accumulate. Every conversation I didn't have, every warning sign I smoothed over, every moment I chose peace over honesty. Those weren't neutral decisions. They were deposits into a ledger that eventually had to be settled. What happened in that conference room was the settlement. It looked like a surprise. It wasn't. That's the thing about cause and effect that nobody tells you when you're young and building something. It doesn't always announce itself. It moves quietly, over years, and by the time you see it clearly, you're already living inside the consequence. I don't say this to excuse anyone, or to assign blame with any precision. She made choices. I made choices. Both sets of choices led to that room. The difference was that somewhere along the way, I started paying attention. And I did the work that attention required. I protected myself not out of revenge, but out of the hard-earned understanding that self-respect is not optional. You can love someone completely and still refuse to be erased by them. Those two things can be true at the same time. The intelligence part, and I mean intelligence in the plainest sense, not cleverness or strategy. The intelligence part was reading my own documents, knowing what I had written and why, understanding that the protections I'd built into our partnership agreement weren't bureaucratic language. They were the record of a man who had thought carefully about what he was building and what it was worth. That man had done me a favor across 30 years of distance. I owed it to him to listen. The resilience part was simpler and harder. It was getting up the next morning. And the one after that, going into a smaller office with bigger windows and making calls and doing the work without the scaffolding of a 34-year identity holding me up. That's not dramatic. It doesn't make for a good scene. But it's the part that actually mattered. My son asked me once if I regretted the marriage. My son asked me once if I regretted the marriage. I told him no. Not the marriage, not the years, not the firm we built together, not a single case we argued side by side. What I regret is the silence I confused for loyalty, the patience I confused for loyalty, the patience I confused for wisdom. There's a difference between being steady and being stuck, and I spent too long believing I was the former when I was sometimes the latter. What I know now is that the most important thing a person can do, in business, in marriage, in any partnership, is stay honest with themselves first, not cruelly, not constantly, but honestly. The moment you start managing your own perception of what's happening instead of seeing it clearly, you've already started losing something you may not be able to recover. I walked out of that conference room into something that was mine. It took 34 years and one very quiet folder on a table to get there. I'd have preferred a different road, but I'll take where it led.